plugged me. Yes, they plugged you on.
Okay. So.
Good afternoon and welcome to the SBR Futures series on 21 lessons for the 21st century in partnership with the IMF Library. I am Martin Mühleisen. I'm the director of the Strategy, Policy and Review Department here at the Fund, and our department and the library are organizing this event today. As you know, the Futurist series brings experts from other ways of scientific and academic life to the Fund to spark new ideas and foster diversity of thought. We may hear about certain things for the first time. We may encounter views that clash with our economic minds, but I think we all agree that there is benefit in considering other perspectives. This is also a mission of the IMF Library, which fosters discovery, creation, and knowledge sharing to advance the work of the Fund. With this, we are really delighted to have Professor Yuval Noah Harari with us today. If you visited a bookstore in recent years, you are sure to have encountered one of his two previous books on the history and future of human civilization. Published in 2014, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind has become an international bestseller and is published in nearly 40 languages worldwide. In 2016, Professor Harari published Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, which met with a similar reception from an enthralled global audience. And his latest book, which carries the same title as our seminar today, has just been launched yesterday. 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Professor Harari has also written for global newspapers such as the FT, the Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, and is lecturing around the world on topics explored in his books and articles. And for the sake of academic completeness, he received his PhD from the University of Oxford in 2002 and is currently a lecturer in the Department of History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Some of the themes that have emerged in past Futurist series are the need for lifelong learning, skills training, and the need to focus on what is uniquely human, including by making growth inclusive and provide people with equal opportunities. These themes also appear in Professor Harari's work with a further examination of what it means to be Homo sapiens in today's world. We're looking forward to a very interesting discussion with the Managing Director. And with that, I turn it over to you, Managing Director.
Thank you so much, Martin. And, you know, we are superbly lucky today, Professor, because this morning we had the luxury of the Comme Dessus lecture, which was this morning presented by Elvira Nabilyona, who is the central bank governor of Russia. And this afternoon we have you. So it's really a fantastic day. We talked about monetary policy this morning, and we talk about all sorts of things this afternoon. And that's also the beauty of those lectures sponsored by the Strategy and Policy Review Department of the IMF. It gives everybody a chance to be inspired by broader thinkers than just us. So thank you very much for coming all the way from Israel via wherever you launched yesterday. But
New York.
New York. So thank you so much for choosing us as you the day after moment. So, you know, when Martin and his colleagues thought of inviting you, it wasn't without creating a bit of a buzz. Because in various writings of yours, we seem to understand that the future is not necessarily for economists. The future is more likely to be for poets, for philosophers, for ethical experts, but economists, well, maybe not, but maybe yes. So you'll have to tell us about that.
I'll just say that the distance between economists and poets is much smaller than people tend to assume.
Woo!
I often say that the best storytellers in the world are the economists. because they are the one who tell the only stories that everybody believes. Almost everybody.
Weather forecasters are not bad either, right? That's interesting. We'll come back to the story issue because you make the point about stories and how useful, not useful, and what kind of stories we need around. But let me just mention, I don't know if Martin has indicated that, but your book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, is available to all of those who participate in the lecture. Is that so? Okay, so please,
Supply and demand.
those who leave the room before the lecture is over or the conversation is over will not get a book. And then when it's over, you have to rush. And a few will probably have a dédicace from you, which would be a real treat. I've tried, and we continue to try on a regular basis, to sort of assume what the future will be. And we call that the long-term uncertainty sort of scenario planning. Now, you took that exercise very far. And some of you critics and your reviewers would call you an alarmist or a pessimist. You say things like, no human job is safe from automation. Current political systems may become completely obsolete. Personal decision-making may be taken over by algorithms. Wealth and power will increasingly become concentrated in the hands of a few. This is probably similar to some of our long-term uncertainty scenarios, but certainly not the ones that we hope will actually develop. In your books, and particularly in the last one, you seem to be much more assertive about what this future. And what is the point about explaining all that?
Well, I see my job not as trying to forecast the future. I think it's impossible. Nobody really knows how the world would look like in 2050 or 2100. I see it more as mapping different possibilities in the hope that we will avoid the worst outcomes. And yes, it is true that I tend in my writing and also in my talks to emphasize more the dangerous scenarios because there are so many people whose job it is to emphasize the positive scenarios. Certainly when it comes to technology, it's quite natural and obvious that the people who develop the new technologies like AI and bioengineering and so forth, both the scientists and also the entrepreneurs, they naturally emphasize all the wonderful things that AI can do for us. And there are many wonderful things that it can do for us. But then it becomes the job of historians and philosophers and social critics to balance the picture and say, wait a minute, there are also a few dangerous scenarios. Now, I do my best to tell people, look, I'm not a prophet, I don't know what's going to happen, and there is no point really in prophecy. If you know for sure that this is going to happen and nothing we do can change that, what's the point of telling people? Yeah, it will happen. So I try to focus on the dangerous scenarios in the hope that we can still do something about it.
So you are sending, with those books, and particularly this one, you're sending a bit of an alarm signal, saying this is on the horizon, and we can do something about it.
Yes, we can certainly do something about it. Again, I try to emphasize as much as possible, also by looking back, that no technology is ever deterministic. You can use the same technologies to create completely different kinds of societies. We have seen it in the 20th century, that you can use trains and electricity to create dictatorships or liberal democracies. The trains don't care. They work for both. Yeah. It's up to us to decide what kind of use to make of them. And it's the same with AI. It can create a wonderful world, and it can be the basis for the rise of digital dictatorships and all kinds of extremely unequal societies.
You make a point in your book as well that we talk a lot about infotech, and people are concerned about that and focused and explore the consequences of infotech, ITC, and so on and so forth. Your point is that it's not in and of itself the end of it. It's combined with others, such as biotech, which is for the moment a little bit under the radar screen, that there will be massive transformation. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, I think what we are seeing, and we'll see more and more, is not an infotech revolution, but rather the merger of two revolutions, infotech and biotech. And without the biotech part, AI by itself is not going to transform the world so much. What is going to transform the world is the combination of AI with an increasing understanding of the human body and of the human brain. You could say that the most important fact about living in the 21st century is that we are becoming hackable animals. And you have these two components. The animals come from biology and from biotech, and the hacking comes from infotech and from computers. Mm-hmm. But for almost any change that people talk about today, you need to take biology into account. Even something like a self-driving car, which you say, what's the connection with biology? Why is biotech relevant to self-driving cars? Well, without biotech, you can't have self-driving cars, because a self-driving car, in order to function in a city full of pedestrians and maybe human drivers and certainly human passengers, it needs to be able to understand human behavior and human emotions. A car which doesn't understand how pedestrians behave, you won't want such a car on the road.
But can't you have so many data and so much mining and so much analytical work done on multiple human behavior that you actually don't really need the biotech dimension once you've accumulated all that and can anticipate?
But that data you're accumulating about all these humans, it's really about the human animal, how it behaves, and it's not enough just to collect this amorphous data. You need to have models for how humans think. And I'll take a very simple example, which is obvious, but I think it makes the point. You need to take into account the difference between how children behave and how adults behave, and the different ways that brains work at age 10 and at age 20. For a self-driving car on the road, it's important to first be able to tell the difference between a child and an adult, to gauge the age of that human being, and to know something about what's the difference in behavior between an 8-year-old, an 18-year-old, and an 80-year-old person. And that's critical, even for something like self-driving car. When you reach the point when you say, okay, I want an AI doctor, I want an AI teacher to replace or augment human doctors and human teachers, there it's obvious that without biotech, you are not going to get very far.
Do you think there could be such a thing as an AI doctor?
Certainly. I think it will be, it's coming quite soon. It will have immense benefits for humans, and it will also have a lot of dangers.
Why would you say it would be beneficial?
Because, for example, an AI doctor could, that say monitors, let's take the classical scenarios that people talk about, that you go around 24 hours a day with biometric sensors on or inside your body, and they constantly send information.
So you monitored you are monitored.
You're monitored all the time. The information goes to an AI doctor, maybe on your smartphone or whatever, which analyzes all this stream of information and monitors your health in a way which no human doctor can even approach. And it can do things like diagnose cancer when it's still just beginning, and it's still very, very easy and cheap and painless to cure it, instead of waiting for a couple of years until it spreads, and one day you wake up and you feel a bit of pain, and you do, it's nothing, and it becomes worse and worse. You go to the doctor, they send you to all kinds of tests, and by the time they find out, maybe it's not too late, but it's certainly going to be a long, painful, expensive process to deal with it. So the promises are enormous. Also, the perils are enormous, and not just to the job market.
So what happens to all the regular doctors? They lose their job?
Depends. They can reinvent themselves and change what they do. Certainly, if most of what you do is just information comes in, you recognize a pattern and you make a diagnosis. This is something that AI will be much, much better than humans. Nurses, for example, are much safer than these kinds of doctors.
Okay. Explain to
because if everything you do is just analyze information, you gather information on a patient, and then again you recognize the pattern. Oh, this is the pattern of lung cancer. Oh, this is the pattern of flu. and this is the best treatment, then this is the easiest thing to automate. But if you actually need to give an injection to that person, if you actually need to change a bandage or to give a shower, that's much more difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, we are going to have AI doctors long before we have AI nurses.
Yeah, I mean, this is a finding that particularly in Japan, they are experimenting with the difficulty of inventing that robot, which is going to lift patients out of their bed, which is just almost impossible at the moment.
Yeah, and
unless you have the human beings to actually do it.
Exactly, and people often think that no, we are not going to have AI doctors because a good doctor needs to not just diagnose my disease and recommend treatment. The doctor must understand my emotional state, must take into account my fears, my anger, my depression. This is part of treating me. And people say, oh, an AI will never be able to do that. But this doesn't really make much sense, because at least as far as biology tells us today, anger and fear and depression, they are also biochemical processes, biochemical patterns, just like flu or cancer. If the AI can diagnose flu, it can also diagnose anger. And the fact that it doesn't have any emotions of its own actually makes it in many situations much better, because it has no distractions. And you know, your human doctor, maybe her husband this morning had a fight with her, and she's treating you, but she's still kind of reconstructing the fight from this morning. An AI doctor has no husband. So
for the moment.
For the moment. So the AI can focus 100% on you. And you know, people go through life wanting somebody to understand me, somebody to understand how I feel. People are obsessed with it. I want my mother to understand me. I want my husband to understand me. I want my president to understand me. And you know, when two humans meet, it becomes a contest of I want you to understand me and you want me to understand you. And very often we miss each other.
So it blurs the judgment.
But with an AI, the AI doesn't want you to understand it. It is 100% focused on you. And it reacts, if it reaches a sufficient level of sophistication, it can react in the perfect way to your personality type, to your current mood. Actually, the danger, I think, is that people will become so used to computers that are so empathic, that really understand me so deeply, that really care about my tiniest nuance of emotion, that humans will not be able to compete. We will become intolerable to all these humans who don't understand us the way that the computers understand us.
There are a few books that have been, novels at least, that have been written on that page. You suggest in your book that there should be basic universal support, not basic universal income, which is some topics that we've studied particularly last year in the Fiscal Affairs Department. Do you think that's the future for doctors?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Will it be? No, it's more seriously. Because jobs will be affected, because the combination of infotech and biotech is going to outroot many of the skill sets that are currently displayed by human beings. Those human beings are going to have to reinvent themselves, as you said. That has a cost, and they will need some kind of income or support. First of all, what difference do you make between income and support? Is support more than income?
It's a different approach.
Yeah.
Whether you just go and give a person a pile of money, do with it whatever you want, or you decide this is the kind of basic necessities, whether it's healthcare, education, food, and I'm going to give you these services for free, but you don't get to choose which services. So it's a different approach. I don't suggest it as this is the solution. I just discuss it because many experts are exploring these avenues. I think the main point that I'm trying to make, like in the new book, in 21 lessons about, call it universal basic income or universal basic services, the real problem, I think, is in the first word, universal. Most people, when they think universal basic income or universal basic support, they actually mean national. They actually think in terms of, okay, you have all these unemployed taxi drivers in New York or coal miners in Pennsylvania, and at the same time, you have a booming AI industry in Silicon Valley. Let's tax the big Silicon Valley giants and use that money to give support or income to the unemployed coal miners in Pennsylvania. Right. But this is national. The really big question is what will happen to people in other countries, because the automation revolution will probably have a completely different impact on different countries, on different economies. Some economies will boom because they will be the center of the automation revolution, and actually a lot of industries that went out will come back. And then other countries might lose everything. Their economies might completely collapse. So the question is not whether you tax companies in California to pay basic support for people in Pennsylvania, but whether you tax companies in California to give basic support to people in Bangladesh or Honduras. That's the real challenge. And we need to think, if we are going to think in terms of universal basic income, we need to seriously understand what the word universal means. It doesn't mean national.
But that requires a complete change of governance or paradigm or whatever you want to call it, because that universal support service or income, whatever you call it, will require a universal taxation mechanism and reallocation based on empirical evidence of who is suffering, who is benefiting, and how you want to sort of reallocate value in order to avoid chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be extremely difficult. I'm just making this comment because you do hear a lot today about universal basic income or universal basic support as the solution to if we don't manage the automation revolution very well. And my concern is that most of the people who are discussing it think in national terms, but the worst imbalance will not be between different parts of one nation, it will be between different nations. It will be like maybe the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, only much worse. That in the Industrial Revolution...
Can you develop that?
Yeah, in the 19th century, you had a very small number of countries leading the Industrial Revolution and getting, at least for a couple of generations, most of the benefits, and really dominating and exploiting much of the rest of the world. And most countries...
colonialism and all of that.
Most countries remained far behind. And the same thing may happen again with the AI revolution. And you have today some countries which are at the forefront of the automation revolution. And many countries say basically, well, we have much more urgent business than worrying about this. But this is like, you live in 1840, somewhere in South America or South Asia. And you hear that in Britain, they have these things like steamships and railroads. And you say, oh, I have so many more urgent things to worry about than these steamships and railroads. 30 years later, you're a British colony. And this is the situation we are here now. The main difference is that in the 19th century and in the 20th century, the big threat, if you were left behind, the biggest threat you faced was exploitation. They will conquer you and exploit you. In the 21st century, there is actually a worse fate, potentially a worse fate awaiting you. You will not be exploited. You will simply become irrelevant. And being irrelevant in many ways is much worse than being exploited. When you're exploited, at least they need you. When you're irrelevant, that's much more difficult to struggle against.
That takes us to the data, doesn't it?
Yeah, that takes us in the direction of discussing what's happening to the data.
Yeah, what's happening to the... And I think you say in your book that who owns the data owns the future. And those happy few who own the future, the data owner and the data processors and the data miners and all the rest of it, will have a very happy life, whereas the rest of the others will be this precariat out there, eventually useful a little bit, but irrelevant most of the time, unless they're given that universal basic support so that they kept happy and quiet.
That's one scenario, again. We are not sure, but what we can say with far greater certainty is that data is becoming maybe the most important resource of the 21st century. The same way that land was the most important resource in ancient times, and machines and factories were the most important resource in the 19th and 20th century. And at present, we see that almost all the data of humankind, both on the level of the human body And the human brain, it's being concentrated in a few places. And most of the world, you can say, is already in the process of being kind of data colonized, that the data is flowing from all over the world to a few hotspots.
Which one would those be? California?
The usual suspects.
So
California, East Asia, a couple of places in between, Bangalore, a couple of places maybe in Europe. And in much of the world, they are just giving up their data for free. Or maybe in exchange for funny cat videos. I'm not sure if this is like completely free.
Google would argue with you vehemently that it's not for free and you're getting a lot of services for free. Therefore, that's a consideration for access to your data.
Yeah, the question is whether you get a fair, what is a fair price is one of the biggest questions in economics ever, and we are not going to settle it here. But there is a huge suspicion that what you're giving up it may be worth far, far more in the long run than what you're getting in exchange. So it's done voluntarily in most places, in most countries. But this is also largely because people don't realize the importance of what they are giving. And one of the problems is I don't have this is the solution. Okay, let's have government regulation of data, let's nationalize it. Nobody really
the Europeans are trying to do that with GDPR. Not dealing with the property of data, but at least dealing with the more philosophical question about who owns it, who has privacy, who has the right to either give it away or retain it.
There are many plans and models today for how to do it. What we lack is experience. What history teaches us is that trying to regulate something like that is going to be quite complicated and mistakes will be made. And we are not sure what is the best way to do it. And when you try to regulate the ownership of land, you have thousands of years of experience going back to ancient Mesopotamia and the ancient Chinese civilization, and you can learn. And you have a couple of centuries experience in regulating the ownership of machines and factories and all that. But we have very little experience in regulating the ownership of data. So yes, the debate is starting. All kinds of experiments like what is being now done in Europe. This is beginning. But we are working with a much, much shorter time frame than before. We can't go back to the past. There is almost no record of something like that. And we need to do it very quickly because the development of this technology is going at an accelerating rate. And if we or some of us get it wrong, we may not get a second chance to try again a different tack. If you are left behind in the AI arms race, then maybe you never get a second chance.
That's not very reassuring. Now, I'm just turning to my excellent organizers. There is a time when I have to turn over the floor to the audience. It's not just now, but I simply want to warn you so that if you have questions, if you are curious about a particular area, you should prepare, because I'm going to turn the floor over to you in about 10 minutes. But for the moment, I still have a few questions on my mind. You talked about the economists being poets. I would challenge you on that, but some of us have to read a lot of material, and I'm not sure that it sounds like poetry most of the time. But you say that economists write great stories that many people believe. I would challenge that too, by the way, because
that many people believe them, or that.
Well, I remember days when we were trying to tell a story in the UK before the Brexit vote was out, and
somebody told a better story.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think you're right. Which raises the issue of the truth. Can you write a good story because it's a good story, irrespective of the facts?
Yes.
Or yes, you do.
Oh, definitely. If there is one thing,
even though it's a lie.
Yes. Some of the best stories in the world are not true. Starting with Harry Potter and going all the way to books which maybe I won't mention in order not to offend anybody's emotions.
But you take the view that religion or religious stories are just stories, and they are narratives that help people along, but they're just stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you need to differentiate between saying that a story is not true and saying that a story is harmful or not effective. To get a lot of people to cooperate, you need to convince them to believe in a shared story. Now, sometimes the story can be completely fictional, and it still works. And, you know, it starts with things like, I don't know, playing games, like playing football. If you want to get 22 people to play football, you need for all of them to agree on a common story for what football is, what are the rules, what are the goals, what is allowed, what is not allowed. And there is nothing wrong with it. Everybody knows that we invented the rules. It's completely fictional. It's not the laws of physics or the laws of biology that mandate these rules. And as long as it goes, it's fine until somebody forgets that this is just a story we invented. And you have a football hooligan starting to beat or kill somebody because of a football game. And then you have to remind that person, look, it's just a story we invented. Don't take it so seriously. Now, this goes all the way to things like money, which they don't have any objective value. They are not based on the laws of physics or of biology. It's no coincidence that we are the only animals that have money. Chimpanzees don't have money. I mean, chimpanzees can trade, they can barter. Like, I give you a coconut, you give me a banana. This works with chimpanzees.
Barter works, yeah.
But they will be unwilling to part with a banana in exchange for a green piece of paper or in exchange for electronic data on computers. I mean, most of the money today in the world, as you know much better than me, is just electronic data in computers. It's not the dollar bills and so forth. And as I said in the beginning, this is the best story or most convincing story ever told because it's almost the only story that everybody believes. I mean, not everybody believes in God or the same God. Not everybody believes in human rights. Not everybody believes in nationalism. But almost everybody believes in money and in the same kind of money, even though it has no objective value. Even if you think about somebody like the Islamic State, when they captured Mosul and Raqqa, they destroyed museums and they toppled down statues and then they killed people, but they didn't touch the money. When they captured the central bank in Mosul, they found all these piles of green pieces of paper with pictures of American presidents. And instead of burning it, they took it and carefully guarded it. Even they believe that story.
But isn't that based on trust?
Yes, money is really made of trust. If you look at the long history of money from ancient Mesopotamia until today, what money is really made of is simply trust. In the beginning, there was very little trust. So there was very little money, and the money you had to be made from something which was also useful. Like the first type of money we know about for sure was simply made of barley. You could eat it. Now then you switch eventually to gold, which is worthless. You can't do anything useful with gold. It's just a status symbol. And then to paper and now to electronic. And it's because there is more and more trust between people. So money can become more and more insubstantial.
But isn't there a contradiction between the fact that there is more and more, and there are more and more, including crazy people, who put their trust in money, and the fact that the world over, particularly with respect to institutions, trust is actually declining and eroded in many respects? How do you reconcile the two?
Over the last few years, yes. But if you compare the amount of trust that people today have in even global institutions, let's put aside national institutions, to the amount of trust people had in global institutions a century ago or 1,000 years ago, it's incomparable. There is so much trust still in the world today. We spoke earlier about football. So just the recent World Cup in Russia. Just think 1,000 years ago, trying to get people from Argentina, France, and Japan to play together games in Russia. Absolutely impossible. Not just because nobody in America knows about Japan and vice versa, but also because there is no single game that all the people in the world play and agree on the rules. So the World Football Cup or the Olympics is an amazing display of global trust. And it's the same with many of our financial institutions. They have definitely taken a hit over the last decade or so. But if you think about what happened after the global financial crisis, the ability of central banks, for example, to create trillions of dollars out of nothing, they didn't really create it out of nothing. They created it out of trust. There was enough trust in the system that people were willing to go on using the dollars and the euros and the yens, even when they heard about this ex nihilo creation of trillions of new dollars. They were willing to use them because they still had enough trust in the financial institutions and in the governments. This trust is eroding, but we still need to remember, like somebody just told me, that we've taken 1,000 steps forward in terms of global trust over the last millennia, and now we've taken 5 steps back. But we are still 995 steps ahead of where we were.
So we are not
in
at an
1018.
inflection point.
Not yet. We could reach that point. I mean, things can go downhill very, very quickly with humans. But we are still quite near the top of the mountain, at least compared to any previous time in history.
All right. Turning over to your questions and those who